For everyone that's joining us here today, welcome. Very exciting session for me personally. I literally met Frances. I was introduced to her literally like less than a month ago, and I can tell you for a fact that this is the very first time that Frances and I are seeing each other. So, whatever you're going to be hearing today is really off the cuff, very reactive, but straight from the heart, right? Would you agree, Frances?
I definitely agree, and I look forward to it. And very nice to finally meet you, Albea, virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the way we normally start these sessions is that when I first meet my guest, the first question I normally ask is about careers and how they got into what they're doing, right? And I think nine out of 10 people, they actually sort of like randomly sort of like landed into what they're doing. So basically, they just twist and turns in their careers. But for you, Francis, as I understand, you were very laser focused on getting to sustainability. And I think that's also very cool because I think there's some lessons to be learned. So the first question is kind of similar, but for you, it's more about what attracted you to sustainability and what did you do to get noticed and, and actually make that dream of getting to sustainability a reality. So maybe, you can share a bit about your career and, perhaps, the audience here can get some nuggets of insight in terms of how you did it. You want to take a stab at that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Adrian. And again, thank you for everyone who's joining right now. If I may go, I guess, a bit into details on how I've ended up where I am today. So basically, like what Adrian has mentioned, I've been I would consider one of the more rarer cases in the sense that I've always known that I wanted to be in sustainability. And I've actually found this out during my academic years, which is quite lucky. So my studies and my higher studies focused on sustainability. And when I exited my studies going into the workforce, I was very clear about being doing work that is related to sustainability. But I think the key question that I had to figure out was to understand from where I would like to drive this agenda, because it's very clear that sustainability is a very, very large topic. It is not one agenda that can be driven by a single
Absolutely.
person,
Yeah.
a country, let alone a company, etc. So it takes collective efforts. So do you want to drive it from, for instance, the public sector? Do you want to work from it on a nonprofit sector perspective, or do you want to, be in the private sector? And that's something that I needed to figure out. And in terms of how I kind of carved out and I reflected on what helped me guide my decision to be where I am today, there are two key considerations. The first is around trial and errors. I was lucky enough to have done quite a bit of internships actually to allow me to figure out what actually suits me and what I'm looking for. So I understand that, depending on where your career is today, an internship may not necessarily be, an option for you, but there are plenty of ways for you to try different things. So, I mean, for instance, you can put your hand up in a company and say, you're keen to work on this project. You can maybe work on a short-term assignment, etc. But the idea is the same: is to just get your hands dirty and actually try it out. Because I can tell you, out of all of the internships that I've done, they were extremely informative and they completely broke my illusion of wanting to work in specific sector. And I realized that that's not right for me. The second consideration that I have is actually around impact. So I reflect on, the topic of sustainability and where I think the push is most needed and where do I think a material impact can actually be generated. So I think at the time when I was looking at a career path, I think that the private sector is actually where there's a lot of power that could be leveraged, but the awareness level is actually relatively lower than the nonprofit or the public sectors, because the public sectors, you have, policy makers who are already looking at the subject, and nonprofit definitely, more on the activism front of things. So I figured out private sector is where the support is most needed, but yet there's such a potential for the corporates to make a difference. So that's kind of how I knew I wanted to go into the private sector. And before joining HSBC, I've always been in the consulting world, in the sense that I helped different companies to get on track with their sustainability journey, with whatever need that they need, be it setting up governance, be it coming up with a sustainability report, or how they can develop a strategy around sustainability. So that gave me a huge and nice wide ranging exposures, and to understand what the different challenges for different corporates and different sectors, etc. And how I ended up in the financial sector in the end, very simply, is because money talks. We live in a capitalistic world. You cannot deny that, and you need to understand how to speak that language, and you need to understand how we can then ensure that the system is functioning in the way that is towards our advantage. So I figure that's a very important way to drive that agenda.
Yeah, I think that's very good. I think so. When I listen to what you say, Francis, it's basically for you. I think for people who are sort of like tuning in today, who are exploring this area, I think what I'm getting from you is that, you identified what it is that you wanted to do. You identify why it is that you wanted to do it, and then you lastly kind of identify where you wanted to do it, right? Yeah, which sector. And
That's right.
okay, so that's great. And also, before I ask you about, like what you mentioned about sustainability being so big, before we go into like how big it is, but I wanted to find out something very sort of like a question that we always get asked, right? Or I often ponder about myself, and that is basically, when people talk about their career path, they talk about it in linear terms. Like, for example, like I got a lot of internships. I've got a lot of opportunities to move internally and so on and so forth. But then I want to stop and ask whether or not, I don't know, it's a difficult question, but just because, you wanted an internship doesn't mean you're going to get it. Just because you wanted to, you want to rotate within a company doesn't mean you're going to get it. So I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of people behind you, that's going to support you, who you need endorsement from. So
Absolutely.
in terms of, how these external forces kind of married with your own personal, like your own attributes, right? I mean, what kind of advice can you give people, so that they can make that move, because I think it's easy to hear it, like, your role on the surface sounded very smooth, right? But obviously there are a lot of challenges. What kind of skills and habits do you think you had to make that path, smoother, such that, you could then move, slowly, quickly, up that ladder? What are your thoughts on that?
No, thank you for asking, Adrian. And I hope this doesn't come across as, super cheesy or cliche to our audience,
Let's
but
hear it.
I really do think some of the basic work ethics and traits come into play. I think in sustainability, because it's such a challenging field, I think a can-do attitude is really, really important. And like you said, I mean, yes, it sounds like my path is linear, but I have, done work that is not necessarily related to sustainability, even though I had in mind that I want to work in sustainability. And a lot of times it's still about being very willing to work, exhibit a very good quality of output that you produce,
Okay.
but then to also ensure that you support, all the colleagues that you're working with. So I would say showing that collaborative trait is really, really important, because I think if you're willing to help your colleagues, be it colleagues who are parallel or be it someone that you're reporting to, the more that they're willing to vouch for you, I think going forward for
Yeah,
other
makes good sense.
positions or opportunities that you're pursuing. So I know this sounds very common sense and very cliche, but it really
It's
is.
reinforcing, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it
quite
really is
reinforcing.
what
Yeah.
got me here today. And even till this day, I'm, quite a few years into the field, I still find it very true. And I know perhaps we will talk about this a bit later,
We
but
will.
this is
Yeah.
also what I'm looking for, in people as well.
Fantastic. And I think you addressed the internal stuff. So yeah, you're right. Later in the session, in my devious, sinister mind, I got a question for you on the external stuff as well. Okay, so back on track again. And this is something I admit that I struggle with as well, but I'm so glad that you're here so that you can kind of demystify things for us now. Very broad question, but for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with sustainability, right? Except for it being a buzzword. I mean, I know that your colleague Kelvin talked about sustainable financing and investing. Sorry, and to be honest, that's kind of like how that's basically when you think about sustainability, or what I think about sustainable investing, but it's so much bigger than that, right? What how can you sort of like draw us a mental map in terms of what sustainability covers? I mean, some people might park it under the ESG umbrella, But for yourself, is there a way that you can sort of like draw us a mental map in terms of what that space actually covers? Is that an awkward question to ask, or is that too big?
No, I'm so glad you asked that question. And to be
Okay.
honest, I would say, for professionals who's working in sustainability, I think everybody has a different way of kind of explaining what it is.
Yeah.
I have my framework, so I will go ahead and tackle it. I hope that it's helpful.
Mhm.
But to clarify, sustainability is the largest umbrella that you can get. So if anything, everything actually sits under sustainability.
Got
Like for
it.
instance, like climate change, biodiversity issues, like even ESG. Like ESG is one way of helping us understanding sustainability, but they're not necessarily fully interchangeable. So I
Okay.
think that's one thing. And what does sustainability mean? And
Mm.
I guess when you break the word down, it's very obvious. It's your ability to sustain. It's as simple as that. And I guess the other very common definition that I know you're aware of and many people use, and also, essentially came out of the United Nations, is that, sustainability means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to
That's it.
meet
Yep.
theirs.
Yep.
So yes, that sounds very grand, but what does that mean? And so when you look at sustainability, so as the wider, I guess, as the wider umbrella,
Yeah.
then generally people look at sustainability from three different pillars, which is economic, environmental, and social.
Okay.
I know this sounds different from ESG, but I'll get to it. So essentially, people look at sustainability and they think about, okay, so what does economic sustainability mean? What does environmental and social sustainability means? Basically, it means that you need to be able to have access to economic, environmental, and social resources for you to meet the needs of the present. And you hope that your future generations will have the same access to all of these resources
Mm.
to meet their needs.
Mm.
And I guess when we talk about ESG, that then I have to kind of bring it down. So that's sustainability on a broader umbrella. But today we're talking about, if I may, sustainability in a corporate context, because it
Right.
actually means very different things.
Right.
So what does sustainability mean for corporates?
Yeah.
So it's actually, the way I look at it, is that it's actually a sweet spot between business sustainability and sustainability. So you think about, as a company or as a business, what do you do best? And how do you leverage your know-how to contribute to the economy, the environment, and society? That's essentially how corporates think about sustainability. It's not
Mm.
just about their own sustainability as a business, but it's also, ensuring the sustainability of the wider operating context that they're in. And so that still sounds very wide. And how do you go about it? And that's where ESG actually comes in, because it's so wide and there's so many issues to talk about that it's easier to think about issues with the ESG bucket. So the environmental, social, and governance issues. So companies look at, okay, what are some of the environmental or social or governance issues that I really need to manage to ensure that my company is sustainable? I manage the risk and I capture the opportunities that's needed for my
Mm.
business to last
Mhm.
much longer.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of how it all comes in. And in terms of what that means for a company, is actually very different. So what is considered an important issue for a company varies depending on the business model, depending on the sectors that they're in.
Mhm.
And that's when the concept, sorry, I have to introduce another concept. This is the concept of materiality. That's where it comes in, because it's very difficult for a company to work on every single issue that's out there that's related to sustainability, and that's not possible.
Yeah.
And like I've mentioned earlier, it's about finding that sweet spot. What is your business know-how and when can you contribute the most? So for companies, when you look at materiality, is to look at, where do you make the most impact, be it negative or positive, to the economy, the society, the environment, and versus what's important for your stakeholders. And with that concept, then you find the most important issues for your company. And that's generally how companies look at sustainability. So I know
Mm.
that sounds like a mouthful, and I hope that was clear, but that's essentially how corporates approach sustainability. And I think what you've mentioned about sustainable finance and investment and why that's so often talked about is because from a financial services, financial sector perspective,
Mhm.
that's that's our know-how. Our
Yeah.
know-how is to channel capital via different instruments. And so that's where we can make the most impact. How can we make sure we channel capital to the right places
Right.
for sustainability?
Right. So, Francis, I mean, to just I guess, help everyone along. I mean, you gave us that mental map, and I think it's great. How about this question then? Uh,
Go for it.
it's kind of like two-part question. Okay, so
Yep.
the first part is basically like like it's almost like a day in the life of Francis Chan. So for example, I mean, like what's your day looking like? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? You can answer for yourself, or maybe your team, for example. What sort of things do you tackle? And of course, on the back of that question would be, what sort of issues are you now tackling that's keeping you guys up at night, keeping you up at night, and keeping your team up at night? So maybe just an overview for the folks listening. What a sustainability professional, the day looks like, and
Mhm.
also kind of like issues that are kind of like plaguing you, or you're trying to overcome, solve, and things like tackle. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So I think I have to first clarify that, as my title suggests, I do look at things from a corporate sustainability perspective. So this is essentially I guess, a function where you look at sustainability really in its comprehensive view. I essentially look at the sustainability agenda for HSBC in
Got it.
Singapore. So that's
Okay.
very wide. And so that would mean very different things for people who deals with sustainability, for instance, on the operations front, or
Mm.
sustainability people who are, for instance, in the department of structuring deals and looking at
Yeah.
sustainability. That's
Yeah.
all very different. But mine is a very wide remit. And I don't know if you're going to be happy with my response, but my day to day, I can tell you there's no one day that is the same.
Oh
And I
wow.
and I
Okay.
genuinely mean that. And I can explain a bit more on why
Mm.
that is.
Mm.
Because if you want to look at and help drive the sustainability agenda for a company, there are many aspects that you need to touch upon. And so when I look at what I do, generally I can categorize the things that I do into four buckets.
Okay.
The first is to ensure that we offer our expertise support to the businesses. So for instance, if they want to talk to clients about sustainability, if they want to develop products that are related to sustainability,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, that's kind of where we come in. The second bucket that we look at is actually external engagement. This is a topic, like I've mentioned, it's a collective effort. You cannot
Yeah.
do it alone. So it's very important to work with industry, to work with regulators, to work with peers, to kind of build that ecosystem out. So a big part of our job is to also engage the likes of MAS and any other agencies and peers and industry initiatives to
Okay.
actually drive this agenda. And HSBC does drive a couple of industry initiatives. So that's another aspect. And then the third aspect I would say is on our internal side. In terms of our operations, our risk management. Of course, I have colleagues who are specialized in looking at those, but corporate sustainability play a role in terms of chipping in, giving feedback, giving that expertise view whenever that's needed. So for instance, like if I do an example, like from operations perspective, if we want to, for instance, procure renewable energy, or if we want to do renewable energy credits, what's considered best practices? How do
Mm-hmm.
we ensure that we've put in place enough due diligence so that we're not greenwashing, for instance? So that's one aspect. And the last bucket actually is that we do also look after our philanthropy programs. So we drive our donations, we develop philanthropic programs where if we feel that our business operations are not helping this agenda, we can then also do it through our philanthropic efforts on supporting the community. So that's
Mm.
four buckets. And as you can imagine, that's very wide. So
It is
my
very
day
wide,
to
my
day,
goodness. Yeah.
my day to day varies very greatly, I
I
would
think also,
say.
yeah, I think that's also kind of fun, I suppose, right? Because no one,
It's
one
very
day is,
fun.
yeah, just like, yeah, no day is exactly the same. And then I guess
Exactly.
the next question I want to ask, again, is maybe a bit of a toughie as well.
Hmm.
Again, coming up, just approaching things from the perspective of, the people that I work with, right? Okay, so there are some areas, like for example, sustainable investing, that's very niche. Presumably we're looking for an IBD type background and so on and so forth, or like the specific type of skill sets, right? But I think the question I want to ask Francis is that within, and again, I'm saying this because it's a good thing that you have such a big remit, and it's so big, because I think you might be able, hopefully, to tackle these questions under that whole space that you look at, right? So many issues and so many silos and things like that. What
Hmm.
sort of like what's hot basically I think there are a few parts to this question. So what areas are hot, all right, within sustainability in terms of hiring, apart from like, you know, the very niche ones, you know, like you know, like sustainable investing. And I think the part two would be, again, like considering that a lot of people that I work with come from a very different background, maybe an operations background, definitely not sustainability. But the second part question would be then, are there any undeniably transferable, useful skills or, you know, experiences that these said, you know, kind of like hot areas could be kind of like looking for? Again, I mean, I know it might be a tough question, but just wanted to see whether or not you can, you know, illuminate some sort of areas that people can then, you know, hone in and check out a little bit more deeper. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Adrian. And I hope my answer is not too generalist, but I think in terms of, I guess, what's hot or what's needed or what are the opportunities out there,
Yeah.
I think the first is to actually be able to decide which role or which side of the coin you want to be
Which
in.
side?
So
Yeah.
for instance, I'm in a corporate sustainability role, which means I am full-time dedicated to sustainability. I don't have for instance, like a business line or business product that I'm specialized in, but I have to support the organization-wide agenda.
Wide.
So
Okay.
that
Okay.
exists in, I mean, I would say most organization, like a
Mm-hmm.
specialized sustainability role that drives the sustainability agenda. So that's one part. And the other is then you have different sustainability professionals sitting in all the different business areas or the departments. And so then you need to also think about, so you kind of have to first decide like which side you're going to sit on, because that's
Right.
actually how HSBC is structured as well. Like we have sustainability, we have people who dedicate their time to sustainability and embed it in all of the different business lines. And
Mm-hmm.
there are people like me who specialize, sits outside, kind of coordinating and strategizing the whole agenda.
Mm.
So I think they're actually, from what I've seen opportunities on both sides. So I think it's
Yeah.
actually, and that actually, I would say generally works for all corporates. Like if I were to, again, using the financial sector as an example,
Yeah.
then there's role like my role, but then there's also, people looking for sustainability, or there's sustainability related job opportunities in, for instance, like people who are doing banking and people who are doing investment, etc. So like I would say that's the two division.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
generally how things are being divided. And I think in
Okay.
terms of the questions that you asked about, what are some of the skills that's needed? And I would
Yeah.
say generally, I think about it from two perspectives. I guess one is what people consider technical skills, and the other is more soft skills and
Soft skills. Yeah.
qualities and traits that we're looking for.
Right.
And I think technical skills sounds like a no-brainer, but it really does depend on the role,
Yeah.
because each department does different thing. And like I said, depending on whether you're driving sustainability from a position or a team that's similar to mine, or if you're driving it from the business line or the product side or whatnot, then the skills will vary quite greatly. And
Okay.
another factor that I think actually needs to be considered is to look at the team or the department that you're joining and see what skills already existed in there. Because
Yeah.
sometimes, so for instance, for my team, like, I mean, we have people who have plenty of experience in sustainability, but
Mm.
perhaps one day I would much prefer to have someone who has heavy experiences in investment and financing or structuring deals, and not necessarily having that sustainability, because sustainability can actually be an overlay. So if you
Okay.
have an expertise that already exists, sustainability is, I would say, a frame of thinking. You can
Okay.
overlay that. So I would say the technical skills really depends on the role that you're interviewing for, and also kind of the mix of skills and competencies that already exist in that team, and why are they hiring you? Like what do
Yeah.
they want you to bring to the table? So that's
Yeah.
on the technical side. But I think what I really am very keen to highlight is the soft skills and the qualities and traits, because these are
Absolutely.
really transferable. And these are things that would actually allow me to look at someone, and even if you don't have a relevant background,
Yeah.
still willing to give you a chance because of all the experiences that you've had. And so I think the first thing, there are quite a few. I've actually thought about this, and there's actually quite a few. The first is really around communications. Um, Working in sustainability, either you're communicating internally or externally.
Okay.
Obviously, you're trying to convince people to board the ship, right? So
Board the ship.
communications
Yeah, I like that.
is
Yeah.
really important.
Mhm.
And that includes, so if you have experiences doing stakeholder engagement and, coordination, if I see that you do, cross-functional, cross-department coordination, driving that agenda, like that's something that's very desirable. And I would say another aspect of it is that it will be quite great to have cross-sector experiences. And when I say cross-sector, I don't necessarily mean like, oh, I want you to have exposure both in the oil and gas and the telecom, sector, because that's really quite
Impossible. Yeah.
unrealistic. Yeah,
Yeah.
but what I meant cross-sector is really just, so for instance, if you have some exposure dealing with the public sector, then you have exposure dealing with the nonprofit sector. That's actually really great, and that's something that we look for. So for instance, if I go back to the I guess the different roles and responsibilities that I have the responsibilities that I have in my role, then you can see that, I deal with, for instance, the nonprofit world. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I deal with the public sector, I deal with the
Yeah.
governmental agency. So it's very important to have that experience and to know how to kind of navigate and drive that conversation. So I think that's something that I certainly look for. So I would say those are transferable skills that you don't necessarily have to come from a sustainability background.
That's awesome.
And lastly, if I may talk about, I guess, just traits, I think I touched upon this earlier, but can-do attitude, cannot emphasize enough. The can-do attitude is really, really important, because sustainability, usually for most sustainability job, you actually have to do a very big variety of things. So, and you have to be willing to do it, because it can range anything from, for instance, having the pleasure of speaking to you today, to, proofreading an article that's about to go out, but talks about your company's sustainability position, to organizing events, to anything. So it really is very wide ranging. And so that can-do attitude, is very important. I guess no task should be too low in a way. And lastly, I would say what you've talked about earlier, is that motivation. So you have to be quite clear. I usually try to look for, one of the first questions that I always ask is, why do you want to get into sustainability? It's very important to understand the motive and the drive behind going into this agenda, because it's not easy. It's not an easy path to go down. And to be honest, most of the time you're convincing people who are not already on board on the ship. So do you have that drive? And so cliche, but yes, do you have the passion? And this is a job that needs both the head and the heart. So very important. That's something that I look for. Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the last two minutes of you speaking, it's absolute gold, as in like literally gold.
Oh, thank you so much.
And
I'm worried that the audience think that, this is such a
no. I mean,
no-brainer. It's so obvious.
No, I mean, I think it's very reinforcing. And for the people who are in session with us, the attendees, I'm asking these questions for you guys. So please, I hope you're taking notes. Okay. All right. So, those are good stuff. Now I'll take one step again back, right? Like when you look at a resume, for example, right? Now you've mentioned all these wonderful things, can-do attitude, and they have to put it on their resume somehow, cross-sector experience and so on and so forth. That's all good stuff. Let's try to score like a massive goal and try to improve it even more. Let's talk about how does one like that question that you asked, right? Like when I interview someone, I ask why you want to, what's your motivation to go down sustainability? Now take the one step behind that. How do we put it on a resume so that Francis can actually call this person up and say, ask that question in person? What does that what kind of information do you know? And do you think that that's required or that you'd like to see in the resume? That kind of like, what, I'm going to call this guy. And I guess that answer could include things like, specific certifications or courses, just to signify to whoever's reading that, hey, look, I'm investing myself into this, and it's my signal to you that I'm interested in this space, and to the point that I'm taking a course. So anything that you can talk about in terms of how someone can structure that resume to be eye-catching, apart from all that stuff that you mentioned, and also to signify to you that he or she is I'm quite serious, and I'm hoping I can get an opportunity to speak to you and to show you and verbally tell you why I'm going on this path. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I think how I would look at it is, again, how interested are you in this in this agenda, and how do you go about it? And I think for most resumes, like the standard classic format of resume is that you get the professional portion of it, like what you've done in your professional years.
Yep.
You get the
Yep.
academic years and sorry, the academic
Absolutely.
portion of it, and then you
Yep.
get a last other portion that people usually put interesting things like what do they do in their free time, or
Yeah.
like their
Yeah.
interests, or like
Yeah.
additional things that they do.
Yeah.
I look at all three. So for instance, professionally, yes, maybe your title doesn't have any sustainability in it, but do you list out, for instance, like projects or initiatives that you've gotten
Mm-hmm.
involved in that
Mm-hmm.
is sustainability related? That's something that I look for. Definitely on the coursework. So like, have you looked into how you can pursue further learning, how you can upskill yourself additionally? So like some of the certs, we can go into more details later, but like
Yeah.
certs,
Yeah.
things like that, professional education that you've took the extra efforts to pursue
Yeah.
speaks quite largely as well. Because that's it, I mean, everybody just wants to get off work and go home and relax, so like the fact that you've made extra efforts to upskill yourself, I think that speaks a lot on discipline
Mm.
and your willingness to learn. And
Yeah.
lastly, which is the other bucket that I've talked about, that's actually very interesting because some people choose to, for instance, do volunteering. Some
Mm-hmm.
people choose to get involved in certain initiatives, like in the communities or
Yeah.
whatnot, that's sustainability related, and that those also speaks volumes to me because it just means that this really is something that you're very interested in, and you're willing to explore different channels for you to contribute to it, even though this perhaps may not be your daily job. So I think I look for all of those things in all three categories.
I think that's also super useful. I think I like just listening to you. I think it's so synchronized in terms of what myself and my colleagues we go through. Like when we work people, when we work with people on their resumes, we always say that by the time you get to the last section on your interests, you're gonna lose steam and you just want to write something, just get it over with, jogging, swimming, cycling, stuff like that, right? But if they spent an equal amount of time that they did for the preceding two sections,
Yeah.
I think that it could be a really interesting conversation starter, and it could catch the eye of folks like yourself. So I want to say thank you for that, because that's kind of reinforcing to the stuff that we say to the people that we work with. And I think also I'm for any I'm just gonna hang on a second. I'm just gonna see whether or not we have anybody
No problem.
that's
And I
asking
guess
some questions. Yep.
while you're looking at it, if I
Yep.
may, you just remind me of a very good point is that a lot of times it doesn't necessarily have to be sustainability related. Like if it's
Mm,
sustainability related, great,
mm.
in terms of,
Yeah.
for instance, interest like volunteering in different organizations, whatnot,
Yep.
that's great.
Yep.
But at the same time, what usually draws my attention is, for instance, you have an interest in something and you
Yeah.
demonstrate how you've pushed that interest. So
How
for instance,
crazy
like,
you are about it, right?
yeah, basically. I mean, so for instance, like, okay, so you're, into Dragon Boat, done it for a couple of years, ended up being a leader, coordinator practice, etc.
Yeah.
So I think how you've kind of pursue interest and what role you play in terms of pursuing those also catch my attention because it does say quite a bit about your personal characteristics and your
Yeah.
traits. It says a lot, and I guess maybe I'm slightly biased just because I do like sports, and so I understand the effects that sports has on people, and so I
Yeah.
do think it speaks quite a bit as well.
Well, again, it's job seekers out there, people who are listening, and how to affect Francis's mind. You know what to put, Dragon Boat and sports and things. Good luck. Okay, so before we, I just want to say for everybody's here, I'm gonna try to wrap up this session in like 10 minutes. So if you want to put in a question, we're gonna try. We might not answer everything, but um, um, you can have an opportunity to put your question in the Q&A box. Okay. Before I hit the first question, Francis, are there any on the topic of that courses and certifications, right? Are there anything that you guys are looking out for that's quite valuable that maybe isn't such a very big investment, like, oh, I'm going to do a whole master's degree in sustainability? I mean, not
Hmm.
necessarily that, but maybe some sort of like short certifications, and I don't know, but I mean,
Yes.
how do you have any recommendations or things that you think quite valuable, perhaps?
I do. So I think if and I apologize for the short, I guess the very narrow scope. I would like to take it again from the financial
Sure,
sector
no problem.
perspective.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I mean, I'm not plugging or anything, but the first thing is, for instance, I mean, IBF does offer a great range of sources. So I would say that's really one of, I really think so. That's one of the portal that you can certainly look into.
Yeah.
Obviously, government offers great support if you want to pursue these educations.
Mm-hmm.
They're short enough and manageable enough. And I think the other thing that is something that we can look out for is the fact that, obviously the Sustainable Finance Technical Skills and Competencies was launched
Mm-hmm.
earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
know there are quite a few institutes that are already developing courses that are aligned to what we call the Sustainable Finance TSCs. So when
Okay.
those come
Yeah.
online, I think that's something that people can certainly look for. But if I may just quote a couple of others that I think has been quite popular within the Sustainable Finance world or sustainability, business sustainability in general. First of all, I think around the Singapore Management University Advanced Certificate in Sustainability and Sustainable Business. I think that's one of the ones that are very popular, not financial sector
Okay.
specific, but gives good insights. And in terms of sustainable finance related things, Charter Banker Certificate in Green and Sustainable Finance,
Okay.
another very popular one. CFA Institute Certificate in ESG Investing,
Oh,
yet another very popular one. If you're a risk profession and looking into doing climate risk management, then GARP Sustainability and Climate Risk Certificate is another very
wow.
popular
Okay,
one.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think lastly, just to kind of wrap it up, is that if you want to look for something that's abroad and maybe more from an academic institute, the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership has a range of really good online courses that are not
Okay.
just limited to sustainable finance, although they do have a coursework on sustainable finance. So it's quite interesting to look at all these options. And honestly, I think there are really a lot of options out there. So it's a matter of what your role is and what do you want to achieve and how these
Yeah.
courses can supplement, your upskilling.
Yeah, exactly. And also it acts as I said, right, like the signal to something that you put as a testimony to the fact that, I am quite interested in this area. And here's the proof that I'm investing time, maybe a bit of money, to get into and to pick up these certificates. So I think that probably be a reassuring thing for folks like yourself to see. Okay.
Mhm.
So looking at a question, I'm looking at Rajat Gupta. Thanks, Rajat. Again, I don't know whether you can answer this, but I just ask, what are there any different core technical skills required for various ESG roles? I mean, that's kind of broad, but do you want to take a stab at this, or you know,
Mm.
the second question? Yeah.
Yes, I will try to take a stab at this because this
Okay.
is indeed a bit broad. And like I
I
said,
guess
I think
core technical skills are there. I mean, is that even is that even possible? Core technical skills, or is it just very too different? You think?
it's a bit hard because again, I like I said, I think technical skills really depends on the role that is being recruited.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
for instance, if I were to take my team as an example, then one of the things that HSBC is very big on is the climate agenda. We've made our net zero commitments. And so it is very key for us to understand how we can address climate change and how we can help, the
Mm-hmm.
transition to low carbon economy, etc.
Yeah.
So like the core technical skills that I would potentially look for is, do you have an understanding of climate change? Like, do you know what that actually means? And
Yeah.
if you have any exposure, I mean, this is getting very specific, but if you have any exposure on like what does net zero mean, and you have experiences of looking at like how do you set science-based targets, or like you have experiences of what transition means in different sectors, because in the end we do support customers in different sectors. Like, so if you
Right.
have those things that's related to the climate transition, that
Mm.
will be very helpful. But that's a very niche and specific area, and again,
Okay.
I think it depends on where you're again, like where
Again, what
you're
you're applying, because
what
it's
you're
so big, right?
applying
Yeah.
to. So for
Yeah.
instance, like
Yeah.
I think someone from the telco sector will look at something will look at skill set like very differently. So my
True.
apologies, Roger. I don't know if I've been helpful, but it really depends on the role, I would say. Like,
Okay.
I mean, for instance, if my risk colleagues are hiring, then perhaps they would like to look at someone with experiences in
Mm.
doing like climate stress testing, or
Mm.
perhaps running like stress testing models, but with climate considerations, etc.
Mm.
But yes, happy to further elaborate if there is a follow-up question.
Oh, no worries. Oh, he says, Raja says, thank you. So I
Thank you,
think
Raja.
that's
Hopefully
pretty
that
okay.
was
Pretty okay. Yeah. Okay. So I have one as well from an anonymous attendee.
yeah.
Okay. not kind of true, I guess. I mean, if you can see it from my interaction with recruiters, roles which come up in sustainability are quite rare. My guess is companies typically already have a lot of internal employees who have an interest to join what is typically a small team, and so such roles, if they do come up, typically get filled by internal employees. What hope is there for people on the outside trying to get in? Ooh, okay, so pretty direct question. But do you want to take a stab at that or not?
No, I'm happy to do my best, and unfortunately, I can only speak on my personal hiring experiences. But I do agree that teams in sustainability are generally a bit small, and I think the reason why these roles are typically like internal candidates, for instance, are generally considered first is because they have the advantage of an organizational knowledge,
Yeah,
because sustainability takes a lot of coordination. So if you already have a network established internally and you know how this company works and you know the people and you know the works, the process, etc., like that's a really big advantage. And I would say that's why a lot of times perhaps things, like internal candidates are looked at because they feel that at least I don't have to teach you about that.
but
Um,
I
but
just also wanted to interject because I just thought about something. You were an external candidate because you joined from KPMG, right?
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I was an external candidate, and I have to say that, I mean, in my recent hiring external candidates, if I can say it very directly. So I really, at least from my personal experience, I don't think it, at least for me personally, I really don't think it's a must. Like it has to be internal, but I did wanted to just offer perhaps a bit of explanation as to why internal candidates for some organizations are preferred.
mm,
And I would say that works for every organization, but for people who have to hope on the outside, I think it then again depends. It really then you have to be able to showcase the experiences that you've had.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I would say that's really where the hope is coming from. And again, as I've mentioned, experiences don't necessarily have to be professional experiences. It can come through
yeah.
from the academic aspect. It could come from, maybe like your personal time, etc. But um, that's what it is. And I think um, it's true that the sustainability roles are perhaps they perhaps don't come across very often. But at the same time, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel that I've seen more and more job openings around
Right.
sustainability, which I think is a great sign. That means all the organizations are thinking about this agenda, and it's a very welcome change.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, perhaps the input was not extremely direct, but
I mean, I think what you said was important. I mean, you probably joined HSBC like maybe 3 years ago from KPMG. So you were an external candidate, and then you probably had, I think we covered this in the beginning, right? Like skills, habits, attributes that you kind of transmitted over to the HSBC folk that say, you know what, I like her, and then you got the job, right? And I think it's still very much the same now. I mean, the internal candidate aspect is always going to be a given, right? Because it's like what you mentioned, it's so much easier to hire someone who's a known, it's not like a known variable, whatever it is, right? Um, so I think this just further emphasizes the fact that people who are interested have to get all that information that you kind of mentioned, right? That interest, that those skills and transferable skills into like that first document, which is the resume. Get it in, get it strong, get it get it to speak on your behalf when folks like you read it. And then stage two would then, if work on that interview skills and try to drive that home, for example. And then hopefully, I'm assuming that your journey was not too different from what I just described, right? Good resume, a lot of transfer of experience, and then when people interview you, you just hit it home. And then before you know it, you get the offer. Well, I think make it sound as quite easy. It's not easy, but I suppose we do what we can to make it as close, it kind of maximize our
yeah.
success percentage, or what we call
If
it, right?
I Right, and
Yeah,
I think if I may, I think there is actually one point that I should have just mentioned,
yeah, please.
which is very important. I think for any applying for any jobs, it can be sustainability, but it could just be any jobs, is to do your homework. you know, in
Absolutely.
terms of
Research. We call it research. Yeah.
exactly. So you need to research about as much as you can. And ideally, if you have some sort of connection or some sort of network to be able to get an inside view, maybe speak to some people in the organization, that would be great because for any team to have an opening or to be recruiting, there is a reason why they're recruiting. So it could
Yeah.
be as simple as, you know, replacement headcount. It could be a new headcount. And why is that? Because they lack certain abilities. They want certain competencies to come into the team. And perhaps it doesn't, you know, perhaps it doesn't exist internally, you know, and that's why they're
Yeah.
opening up, right? And so doing that homework, you know, try to see if you can leverage your network and to get perhaps as much of an inside view as you can and to structure your resume, and hopefully if you get an opportunity to speak in person in an interview, to flash out those capabilities that you think can complement or you think that they're looking for. I think that's also very important as well.
Oh man, that's awesome. I guess on that note, I just want to give Florence also some time to prepare for the next session. So
Absolutely.
I'm just going to wrap up. Now, before I do, I always ask this last question, Francis, which is basically any last words to the people that are joining us here or on Facebook, whatever it might be. Any words of encouragement or thoughts before I kind of let you go with thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. Last words. I think the first thing is I just want to thank everybody who has dialed in and thank you for taking an interest in sustainability. I really genuinely think it's one of the most important things that we need to address to ensure that we still exist on this planet. So it's a fundamental existential question. So I appreciate your interest in thinking about this issue. That's first thing. And I think three key takeaway, which I think I've mentioned already earlier in some of my responses. But the first thing is really be clear about why you want to get into sustainability.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be a tough journey because you're going to be working alongside many stakeholders and going to try to bring them on board. So be clear about why you want to be in this field. And
Okay.
the
Yeah.
second thing is to, go home and think about what you're currently doing, your current job, etc. And if you were to overlay a sustainability layer on it, how could you actually contribute to the sustainability agenda starting from today? Like your job functions, perhaps you work in operations. Do you think your operation is energy efficient enough? For instance, do you think you're using too much paper? I mean, I know this sounds very simple, but putting that sustainability cap on and start thinking about how that would, how your current roles and responsibility can contribute to the agenda will take you a long way. And the last thing that I want to mention is to just stay curious, stay informed, and keep learning. Because sustainability really is one of the fastest shifting field there is out there. The amount of things that comes out on a daily basis, and even the amount of readings that I have to do to just keep up with what is happening in the world is quite tremendous. So
Yeah.
stay thirsty, stay curious.
Stay curious. I want to add a fourth cheeky one, which is come see a career advisor. Okay. If you guys are having a bit of a career issue, journey, resume, interview, things like this. So yeah, just a bit of a cheeky kind of like slip it in there. But I want to take this opportunity to say thank you very much, Francis. Lovely to meet you in person at last. And I'm hoping that we can have more dialogues in the future again. Hope you had fun. And for the people who joined us today, I hope you guys learned a lot. And if you are interested in getting to this space, that you know what you should be doing as the next step. And just wanted to reiterate that you're never alone. There are people here that's gonna, helping you, supporting you, and so on and so forth. So as I said, feel free to get in touch with us, and we'd be very happy to help you. Apart from that, nothing else. Again, have a good rest of the day, good rest of the week, Francis, and look forward to meeting you in person